The clattering of glasses echoed in the dimly lit restaurant, a soft reminder that another night of exhaustion was coming to an end. Emily Thompson wiped the sweat from her brow, her hands still trembling from the weight of the long shift. It was nearly midnight, and her tired eyes barely managed to focus on the last few orders. But she had learned long ago to push through, to survive on the bare minimum of rest and caffeine. Her life was nothing but work, serving plates, pouring drinks, and keeping her head down. It had to be enough. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she couldn't ignore the whisper of something more, something she was yet to find. She took a deep breath, adjusting her uniform as she moved toward her last table of the night. The rich scents of expensive wine and gourmet dishes filled the air, mingling with the distant hum of conversation and the clink of silverware. As she approached the corner table, her heart skipped a beat. The man sitting there had an aura about him that commanded silence. Vincent Romano. She had seen him around, known of his reputation, but never up close. His dark suit fit him like it was tailored specifically to him, and the way his sharp eyes moved from one person to the next, taking in everything around him, made her shiver. A mafia boss, no doubt. The kind of man who didn't need to speak loudly to make his presence known. He glanced up as she approached, his gaze piercing, studying her in a way that made her feel like she was suddenly the subject of an unspoken test. "Water," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of authority. His eyes never left hers, and she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper as she replied, "Of course." She turned to walk away but paused as his voice called out, "Wait." She hesitated, her pulse quickening. He wasn't just another wealthy guest. His tone made that clear. There was something dangerous lurking behind those calm words. Slowly, she turned back. "Yes." His gaze never wavered. "I've been watching you," he said. "You've been working hard tonight." Emily's throat went dry. She tried to smile, but it came out more as a nervous twitch. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, her heart pounding in her chest. But she knew he wasn't asking about her job. The intensity in his stare said it all. He knew something about her, or maybe he saw something in her, something that intrigued him. The moment lingered a little too long, and Emily felt an unspoken tension build between them. She quickly placed the glass of water on the table, eager to escape the weight of his gaze. As she turned to leave, she overheard a conversation from a nearby booth. The words were casual, but the tone, there was something off. A betrayal. It wasn't just idle gossip. It was something darker. Emily froze, the words sticking in her throat. The mafia boss wasn't just here for dinner. He was here for something more. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just become a part of something much bigger than herself. Something that could change her life forever. She tried to shake off the feeling, but as she walked away, her heart kept racing. The night was far from over. Emily had never felt the weight of silence quite like she did when she left the table, her heart still racing from the exchange with Vincent Romano. The evening was winding down, and the restaurant's ambience was starting to mellow, but there was something about the encounter that kept her mind racing. She moved swiftly, trying to shake off the feeling that her life had just veered off course in a way she couldn't yet understand. The voices and clinking of glasses faded into the background as she walked toward the staff room to gather her things. But before she could make it to the door, the sound of her name stopped her in her tracks. "Emily," a low voice called from behind. She turned to find Vincent standing at the bar, his piercing eyes watching her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying a certain weight. "I'm just finishing up," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady, though her nerves were betraying her. "I still have a few things to do." She wasn't sure why she didn't walk away. Maybe it was the curiosity that lingered from their earlier interaction, or maybe it was the strange pull she felt toward him. Either way, she found herself taking a hesitant step toward him. Vincent gave a slight nod, as if he understood something she didn't. "I won't keep you," he said, though his tone hinted that he wasn't ready to let her go just yet. "But I need to speak with you for a moment." Emily hesitated, glancing at the other staff members who were busy finishing their tasks. There was no real reason to stay, but somehow, she found herself agreeing. "Okay," she said quietly, walking over to where he stood. As she approached, Vincent leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even lower. "I know what you heard," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea how he knew she had overheard his conversation, but she couldn't deny the certainty in his words. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, she said quickly, feeling the need to explain herself. I was just passing by. Vincent's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, the intimidating Mafia boss persona seemed to fade away. I know, he said simply. But that doesn't change the fact that you're involved now. The words hung heavy in the air, and Emily felt her pulse quicken once more. Involved? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. You overheard something that could get you into trouble, Vincent continued, his tone calm but firm. And while I don't think you'll be a problem, I need you to understand that you're in this now, whether you like it or not. Emily swallowed, trying to keep her composure, but the weight of his words was suffocating. I didn't ask for this, she replied, the tension in her shoulders becoming more apparent. I'm just trying to get through the night, do my job. Vincent didn't answer right away. He just watched her, as if considering something. Then, finally, he spoke. I can't have you running off, thinking you can just forget what you heard. I'm offering you protection, Emily. She frowned, trying to process what he was saying. Protection, she echoed, unsure if she understood him correctly. I know you're just a waitress, Vincent said, his voice softer now. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. You just need to trust me. Emily shook her head, the confusion still clouding her thoughts. Trust you? She repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Why should I trust you? Vincent didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he looked at her with something that almost resembled pity. Because, whether you like it or not, I'm the only one who can keep you safe now. Emily stood there in stunned silence, the weight of his words settling in. She wanted to run, to get as far away from this strange, dangerous world as possible. But part of her knew that wasn't an option. Vincent had already made it clear that she was involved now, whether she chose to be or not. And for the first time, she realized that she had no idea what the consequences of that would be. Emily couldn't stop thinking about Vincent's words as she left the restaurant that night. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Protection? From what? She had always lived a quiet, simple life. She never imagined her world would collide with the dangerous, secretive world of Mafia bosses. But here she was, unsure of what to do next. The city streets felt colder than usual, the hum of traffic doing little to soothe her nerves. As she walked, her thoughts kept returning to Vincent. There was something about him, something that made her feel both intimidated and oddly safe at the same time. It wasn't just the power he exuded, but the way he seemed to understand her without her saying a word. She had spent most of her life being ignored, overlooked, but Vincent saw her, and in a strange way, that unsettled her. She wasn't used to feeling noticed, especially not by someone like him. The next day, the morning light didn't bring the clarity she had hoped for. Emily had barely slept, her mind constantly circling back to her brief interaction with Vincent. She had a million questions, but no answers. Why had he said those things? What was his game? And, most importantly, what did he want from her? She arrived at work early, hoping that the normalcy of the day would help calm her nerves. But the moment she stepped through the restaurant doors, she felt the tension in the air. The staff moved quickly, avoiding eye contact as they went about their tasks. It was like they all knew something she didn't. Emily tried to shake off the feeling, but it followed her throughout the morning. At noon, she was tasked with serving a private party in one of the back rooms. She didn't mind. It kept her away from the main dining area, where the unease felt stronger. But when she entered the room, her breath caught in her throat. Vincent was sitting at the far end of the long table, surrounded by a few other men. He didn't see her at first, but his presence was undeniable. The room seemed to shift, the air thickening with an unspoken tension. She tried to keep her head down as she approached, but it was impossible to ignore the way Vincent's eyes lifted to meet hers. His gaze was steady, unyielding, like he knew exactly what she was thinking. She placed the drinks in front of him with a shaky hand, avoiding his gaze. But as she turned to leave, she heard his voice again, low and commanding. "Emily," he said, his tone firm. She froze, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back. Slowly, she turned around, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes?" she asked, her voice betraying the nervousness she was trying to suppress. "Come here," he said simply. It wasn't a request. It was an order. She swallowed, unsure of what to do. Her legs felt heavy, but somehow, she found herself walking toward him, her breath shallow. As she reached the table, he gestured for her to sit. "I want to talk to you," Vincent said, his voice softer now, but still carrying that commanding presence. She hesitated, but eventually sat down across from him, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The men around the table continued their conversation, but Vincent's focus remained solely on her. "You're thinking about what I said yesterday," he observed, his eyes studying her with that same unnerving intensity. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. "You don't need to be afraid of me," Vincent continued. "But you do need to understand that the world you live in is not as simple as you think. You heard something you shouldn't have. And now, there are people who will stop at nothing to make sure that secret stays buried." Emily's mind raced. This was getting deeper than she had ever imagined. She had overheard something she shouldn't have, and now it seemed like her life was being dragged into a world she didn't belong in. "What do you want from me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want you to stay safe," he said. "And I want you to trust me. I'm not asking for anything in return, not yet. But you need to understand that you're involved in this whether you want to be or not. So you can either fight it, or you can accept that this is the life you're now a part of." The room seemed to grow even quieter, the weight of his words hanging between them. Emily felt trapped, caught between her fear of the unknown and the strange pull she felt toward Vincent. She wasn't sure what to do next. Her entire life had just changed, and she wasn't ready for it. But something deep inside told her that this was only the beginning. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something unspoken but undeniable. The night after her conversation with Vincent, the unease settled deeper into her bones. She had tried to push it away, to focus on her routine, but the words he had said kept circling in her mind like a warning bell she couldn't silence. "Stay safe. You're involved now." What did that mean for her? She had always considered herself a simple person, someone who just needed to get by, do her job, and go home. But the world she knew had suddenly expanded, revealing shadows she hadn't noticed before. The next day, as she entered the restaurant, her eyes instinctively sought out Vincent. His presence was like a magnetic pull, drawing her in even though she wasn't sure why. He wasn't there yet, but something told her that when he did arrive, everything would change again. It was the kind of feeling you couldn't ignore, even when you wanted to. She had barely started serving her first table when the door opened, and there he was. Vincent, standing in the doorway, looking every bit the Mafia boss he was. His gaze swept the room, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. He wasn't just a man in a suit. He was a force. Emily tried to focus on her work, but it was hard when she could feel his eyes on her, even from across the room. She could feel the tension building, and her hands grew clammy as she brought a drink to a nearby table. She couldn't explain why, but his presence unsettled her in a way nothing else did, as if he was watching her every move. She was just about to step into the kitchen when she heard his voice again. "Emily," he called out, and once more she froze. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the underlying intensity was impossible to miss. "I need you for a moment." She couldn't say no, not when he spoke like that. She walked over to him, her heartbeat a little faster than usual. As she approached, Vincent's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, he smiled, though it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You seem distracted today," he observed. "Something on your mind?" Emily swallowed, trying to steady herself. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to say to that. "Just tired," she muttered, hoping it sounded convincing. He didn't seem to buy it. "I understand," he said, leaning back slightly in his chair. "It's hard to ignore what's right in front of you." Emily's brow furrowed, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "You're in this world now, whether you want to be or not," Vincent continued, his gaze steady. "You overheard something, and now, there are consequences." Emily felt her stomach tighten. She wanted to ask him what that meant, but the words wouldn't come. "I never asked for any of this," she finally managed to say. "You don't have to," Vincent replied simply. "It's not about asking. It's about survival." He sat forward then, his voice dropping lower. "You'll learn that soon enough." Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had never imagined her life would lead to something like this. being caught in the middle of a world she didn't understand, a world that seemed dangerous, unpredictable. I don't want any part of it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent regarded her for a long moment before responding. You don't get to choose, he said quietly. But I'll protect you. That's the only choice I'm offering. Emily's heart raced as she tried to process what he was saying. Protection? What did that even mean in a world like his? Was she just another pawn in some twisted game? Or was there more to this? I'm not like you, she said, shaking her head. I don't belong in your world. Vincent's expression softened, but there was a hardness in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. You're wrong about that, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. You belong more than you think. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She was too confused, too overwhelmed to say anything that made sense. Instead, she just nodded, not sure where this conversation was leading, but unable to walk away. As she turned to leave, Vincent's voice stopped her once more. Be careful, Emily, he said, his tone serious now. You've got one foot in a world you don't understand. It's not too late to walk away, but you have to decide quickly. Emily stood there for a moment, the weight of his words settling in. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life was never going to be the same again. Emily couldn't sleep that night. Vincent's words echoed in her mind, bouncing off every corner of her thoughts. You're involved now. I'll protect you. What did that even mean? She tossed and turned in bed, her mind replaying their conversations over and over. She had never been part of anything like this, never thought her life would intersect with a world as dark and dangerous as Vincent's. She wasn't naive. She knew that trouble followed men like him. But what scared her most was how much he seemed to care. And even more, how much she found herself needing that care. The next morning, she dragged herself out of bed, trying to shake the fog in her mind. Work was the same as always, the routine grounding her as she moved through her tasks. She served tables, smiled at customers, and tried not to think about the things that had happened the night before. But she couldn't help it. Vincent was always there, a presence in the back of her mind, lurking in every corner. When the door opened, her heart skipped a beat. She didn't have to look up to know he had arrived. The room seemed to shift with his presence, the air growing heavier, charged with something she couldn't describe. She tried to keep her composure as she moved to greet him, but there was no escaping the tension that had settled between them. He looked at her as he took his seat, his gaze lingering just a little too long. Emily, he said, his voice smooth, but there was a trace of something more underneath. Come here. She didn't protest, didn't hesitate. There was something about him that made her want to comply, even if she didn't fully understand why. She walked over to him, her steps measured but quick. When she reached the table, Vincent's eyes softened slightly, though the intensity never quite left. I've been thinking about you, he said, his voice low. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the admission. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those sharp, calculating eyes. You're more involved in this than you realize, he said, his words slow, deliberate. I've made it my business to look out for you, whether you like it or not. You heard something you shouldn't have, and now you're tied to it. Emily felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. She hadn't asked for any of this. She didn't want to be part of this world, yet here she was, tangled in its mess. I didn't ask for this, she said, her voice firm, though a hint of doubt crept in. You don't have to ask, Vincent replied, his voice almost gentle. It's just the way things are now. The way he said it made her feel like there was no escape, like the world she had known had already slipped away, and she was left with nothing but the reality of her new life. She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need his protection, that she could handle things on her own. But part of her knew it wasn't true. She had seen the look in his eyes, the certainty that he could keep her safe, and it terrified her how much she wanted to believe him. I don't belong here, she muttered, more to herself than to him. Vincent's gaze softened, but there was a hint of something darker in his eyes. You don't get to decide that, he said quietly. You belong here because you're stronger than you realize. And I'll make sure you're never alone in this. His words lingered in the air between them, and Emily felt a strange flutter in her chest. She had always prided herself on being independent, on being able to take care of herself. But now, she was standing in front of a man who, despite all his power, seemed to be offering her something she hadn't known she needed: protection, security, a sense of belonging. She swallowed hard, trying to push the feelings aside. "I don't need you to protect me," she said, her voice barely audible. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. Vincent smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile she had seen before. This one was knowing, as though he understood something she didn't. "You will," he said softly. "In time, you'll understand." Emily didn't know what to say. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite see, and the more she resisted, the more she was pulled in. She had no idea what her life would look like from here on out, but one thing was certain: she would never be the same. As she walked away from the table, her mind was in turmoil. There was no turning back now. Vincent had a way of making her feel like she was part of his world, even if she didn't want to be. And somehow, despite all the fear and uncertainty, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing: it was too late to turn back now. Days passed, and Emily tried to convince herself that everything was back to normal. She kept her distance from Vincent, continuing with her routine, trying not to think about the strange, unshakable pull she felt toward him. But no matter how hard she tried, his presence seemed to follow her. It wasn't just the way he watched her from across the room, or how he always seemed to show up when she least expected it. It was the way he had spoken to her that night, with such certainty, as if he already knew how her life would unfold. She couldn't deny that something had changed inside her, that she was beginning to feel a strange connection to him. But she wasn't ready to admit it, not even to herself. She was just a waitress, doing her job, living her life. She had no business getting involved with someone like Vincent, no matter how much he seemed to care. But the more she tried to push him away, the more she found herself pulled back. It wasn't until one late evening, when the restaurant was nearly empty, that everything shifted again. She was just finishing up her shift, cleaning the counter, and getting ready to leave when she saw him. Vincent was sitting at a table near the window, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. His posture was relaxed, but there was something in his expression, something distant and brooding, that made her stop in her tracks. She wasn't sure why she went over to him, but something told her she had to. As she approached, he looked up, and for a brief moment, their eyes met, and the world around them seemed to fade away. "You're still here," he said quietly, his voice steady but with a hint of something softer. Emily hesitated, unsure of what to say. "I'm finishing up," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect you to stay this late," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I thought you might want to leave, get some rest." She nodded slowly, not knowing how to respond. There was something about his concern, the way he seemed to know what she needed before she did, that unsettled her. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though it didn't feel true. She hadn't been fine for days, not since she first crossed paths with him. "You don't have to worry about me." Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying her with that calculating gaze of his. "I think you're lying," he said calmly. "You've been distracted. I can see it." Emily swallowed, trying to keep her composure. "I'm not lying," she insisted, but even she didn't believe herself. She had been distracted, overwhelmed even. It wasn't just the job anymore, it was everything. Vincent, his world, the feeling that she was caught in something bigger than herself. Vincent's expression softened, and he motioned for her to sit down. She hesitated, but eventually, she took the seat across from him, her heart racing. "You're not like the others, you know," Vincent said after a pause, his voice low. "I see you. You're different." Emily furrowed her brow, unsure of what he meant. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied. "I'm just a waitress." Vincent smiled slightly, though there was a seriousness in his eyes. "You don't give yourself enough credit," he said. "You're more than that. You've always been more than that." His words sent a strange flutter through her chest, and she suddenly felt more exposed than she ever had. He saw something in her, something that she couldn't quite understand, but it was there. And the more she tried to deny it, the more it seemed to pull her in. "I don't know what you want from me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to get by." Vincent leaned forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I want you to understand that you don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "I'm here, and I won't let anything happen to you." Emily felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had heard them before, but now, in this moment, they felt different. They felt real. She looked into his eyes, searching for something, anything that might explain the way she was feeling. But all she found was certainty, the same certainty that had been in his voice from the very beginning. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why do you care?" Vincent's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, she saw something human in him, a flicker of something beyond the cold, calculating Mafia boss persona. "Because I see you," he said simply, "and I won't let you slip away." Emily's heart raced as she tried to process his words. She wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. She wasn't sure what she needed. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. She had crossed a line, stepped into a world she couldn't escape, and there was no going back now. Emily didn't know how much time had passed since Vincent's words settled in her mind, but the world around her seemed to be shifting in ways she couldn't ignore. She walked through the city streets, the familiar hum of the busy New York night failing to bring the comfort it usually did. She felt out of place, like a piece of a puzzle that didn't quite fit, yet she was stuck inside this strange picture that was being drawn for her. Vincent's presence had somehow managed to seep into her every thought, his words lingering long after their conversations. She had tried to keep her distance, to pretend like nothing had changed, but it was impossible. No matter how much she wanted to deny it, she knew her life was on a different path now, and that path was tangled with his. The pull she felt toward him, the way he seemed to understand things about her that no one else did, was unsettling. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, something that made her question everything she had known. She tried to focus on her work, but that, too, felt like it was slipping away. Her thoughts drifted to Vincent more than once during the day. And then, that night, when she returned to the restaurant, she saw him again. This time, there was a different air about him. He wasn't just a figure she saw in passing. He was an anchor in her world that was starting to feel unsteady. He was already seated, waiting for her, as though he had expected her. The moment she stepped into the room, his gaze found hers, sharp and direct, like he had been waiting for her, like there was no one else in the room but the two of them. It felt like an unspoken understanding between them, and it made her heart beat faster, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. "Sit," Vincent said, his voice calm and unyielding. Emily hesitated but walked over to him, her hands feeling oddly cold as she pulled out the chair. As soon as she sat, he spoke again, his words steady but with a quiet authority that still unsettled her. "You've been thinking about what I said, haven't you?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. She didn't answer immediately. How could she? She hadn't been able to stop thinking about him since that night, and the truth was, she didn't know how to respond. The fear that came with this world, with him, was overwhelming. But there was something else there too. A curiosity, a need to understand what was happening between them. "I can see it in your eyes," Vincent continued, breaking her train of thought. "You're not sure whether to trust me. But trust isn't something you can decide overnight. It's something that grows, little by little. And it takes time. But I'm patient." His words were simple, but they struck something deep within her. She wanted to deny it, to tell him she didn't need his protection or his patience. But she couldn't. There was a part of her that wanted to believe in what he was offering, even if it made no sense. "I don't know if I can be a part of this," Emily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This life, this world you're in. It's too much for me." Vincent's expression softened, but the intensity never left his eyes. "You don't have to understand everything right now," he said, his voice lower. "What I'm offering is simple. Protection. Safety. You're not in this alone anymore, Emily. Whether you accept it or not, this is your reality now." Emily's mind spun as she absorbed his words. She didn't know how to feel, didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but part of her wanted to. She didn't want to be afraid anymore. But the fear, the uncertainty, was still there. "I'm not like you," she said quietly, shaking her head. "I don't belong in this world." Vincent's gaze softened, a hint of something more in his eyes. "You're wrong," he said gently. "You belong more than you think. I see something in you, something I need to protect, and I'll make sure you're never alone in this, no matter what." His words were comforting, but they also carried a weight, a promise that she didn't know if she was ready to accept. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, her voice shaky. "But I don't want to feel scared anymore." Vincent leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then don't," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Let me take care of you. Let me show you that you don't have to be afraid. In that moment, Emily felt the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still to come. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, for the life Vincent was offering her. But as she looked into his eyes, something inside her told her that, for better or worse, there was no turning back now. The days that followed were a blur of routine for Emily. She went through the motions of her work, serving tables and keeping her head down, but something inside her had shifted. Vincent's words had planted a seed in her mind, one that was growing faster than she could control. She had told him she didn't want to feel scared anymore, but the fear was still there, gnawing at her. Every time Vincent's gaze found hers, something in her stirred, a mix of excitement and uncertainty. She wasn't sure if she could trust him fully, but the idea of not trusting him seemed even harder to grasp. He had offered her protection, a lifeline in a world that felt increasingly dangerous. But she didn't belong in that world. She had spent her whole life avoiding complications, seeking safety and simplicity. And yet, here she was, tangled up in something she couldn't escape. It was a Thursday evening when things took a turn. The restaurant was busy, as usual, the air filled with the noise of conversations and the clink of silverware. Emily was just about to bring a bottle of wine to a table when she felt that familiar presence. Vincent was there, seated at the bar, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. She froze for a second, her heart pounding in her chest. He wasn't just a customer anymore. He was something else entirely. She tried to stay focused, but her steps toward the bar felt heavier than usual. As she reached him, he smiled slightly, but there was a tension in his expression that hadn't been there before. "Emily," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge she couldn't ignore. "We need to talk." Her stomach dropped. She had a feeling she knew where this was going, but she didn't know if she was ready for it. She set the wine down in front of him, her hands trembling slightly. "What about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his voice quieter now, almost intimate. Emily's breath hitched. She didn't know how to respond. "You've been through a lot lately," Vincent continued, "and you don't know what's coming next. I need you to be prepared." His words struck her like a cold wave. "Prepared? For what?" "I don't understand," she whispered, though part of her already did. Vincent leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Things are about to get more complicated for you. People are watching you now, Emily. They know who you are, and they know you've heard things." Emily's heart raced as the reality of his words sank in. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in his tone. "I'm saying that the choice you made, by getting involved with me, is one that can't be undone. You're under my protection now, whether you like it or not. And there are people who won't let that slide easily." She felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, and for the first time, the fear she had been trying to suppress crept back in. This wasn't just about being around Vincent anymore. It was about the world he was part of, a world that was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Vincent gave her a small, almost sad smile. "I want you to trust me, to let me protect you." Emily shook her head, unable to fully grasp what he was saying. "I don't want this. I don't want to be a part of this world." "You already are," Vincent replied quietly. "You've seen things, heard things, and now you're tied to me. To all of this." Emily's chest tightened. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. No matter how much she wanted to turn away, she couldn't. She was already caught up in it. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, for the complications and dangers that were coming her way. But as Vincent looked at her, his eyes filled with something like concern, she knew that walking away wasn't an option. "Not anymore. I'm not ready for this," she said softly, more to herself than to him. Vincent reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. "You don't have to be ready. Just let me handle the rest." His touch sent a jolt through her, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding, in a way. Emily knew she wasn't in control anymore. And somehow, despite everything, that thought didn't scare her as much as it should have. She was in this now, for better or worse. And Vincent had already made it clear that there was no turning back. Emily stood in the quiet of the restaurant, the hum of the city outside muffled by the walls around her. The night felt different, heavier. She had gone over the conversation with Vincent in her mind 100 times, but the reality of what he had said still lingered like a shadow, refusing to fade. She didn't belong in his world, but she was already caught up in it. There was no denying that. And the more she tried to push him away, the more he seemed to pull her in. As much as she tried to resist, there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel drawn to him, to the protection he offered, to the way he made her feel safe even in the midst of all the uncertainty. She had told him she wasn't ready for this, for whatever was coming. But she realized now that readiness didn't matter. This was her life now, and there was no escaping it. Vincent had made it clear that she was tied to him, whether she liked it or not. The realization weighed on her, but it wasn't entirely unpleasant. She didn't want to be afraid anymore. She didn't want to feel like she was just surviving, drifting through life without any real direction. With Vincent, there was purpose. There was certainty, but there was also a danger she couldn't ignore. That danger wasn't just the world he came from. It was the world he was pulling her into. Emily knew she had no idea what she was getting into. She had always lived a simple life. This world of power, control, and secrets was foreign to her. Yet, somehow, it felt like she had always known that this was where she was meant to be, even if she didn't understand why. She had seen the way Vincent operated, how easily he navigated through the chaos of his world. He was a force, a man who commanded respect without saying a word. And yet, there was a softness to him that only she seemed to see, a tenderness that contradicted the coldness of the world he inhabited. It was that softness that kept her coming back, even when she told herself she didn't want to be a part of it. She wasn't sure where she stood with him, or where this was all leading, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't walk away. Not now. As the night wore on, Vincent's presence loomed in the back of her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said about protection, about trust. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but she wanted to. She didn't want to feel alone in this anymore. The world around her felt so much bigger now, more complicated. But when she thought about Vincent, when she remembered the way he had looked at her, something inside her told her that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. Later that evening, after the last of the guests had left, Emily found herself walking down the empty streets of New York. The city was still alive, the lights reflecting off the wet pavement, but everything felt different. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the weight of the decisions she had made, the choices that were no longer hers to control. She couldn't go back to the way things were. Vincent had changed everything, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. But as she walked, her steps slower now, she realized that she was no longer afraid. Maybe she wasn't ready for all of this, but she wasn't running anymore. She had chosen to stay, to face whatever was coming. And as much as that scared her, there was also a strange sense of peace that came with it. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be.